see it flowing now is something that brings a whole lot of optimism to a whole lot of people.
The Murray Darling Basin is Australia's life support system.
The fact that we have some good river flows again at the moment should not cause anyone to believe we no longer need reform of the basin.
27 to 37% cut could have devastating impacts on irrigation, on food and fibre production in the basin, which is our food bowl in Australia.
I'm missing you so much, can't help it, I'm in love. A day without you is like a year without a rain.
To plan a basin in the way that is being proposed is really a world first.
The overwhelming majority of the Australian public support the need to restore some water to the Murray-Darling.
The plan that's been released today would be a dagger to the heart of regional Australia.
The authority members are also extremely aware that this will have a major social and economic impact.
Oh, this is absurd to think that 800 jobs are going to be lost. Try thousands, Ali.
So let this drought come to an end.
We were fearing the worst. The information that's come out of this guideline is even worse than we expected.
We simply cannot go on as we have been.
Nobody's being punished. There's $9 billion sitting on the table to solve the problem.
It's not going out on a limb to say that if you take 45% from an area, the area, for all intents and purposes, is decimated.
It doesn't take into account those irrigators that have been water efficient for many years.
Any irrigator who does not wish to sell water doesn't have water taken away.
We will now be a very, very big net importer of food. We will be one of the very few countries in the world that will be a large net importer of food.
We need to stop bickering over how we should be doing it and if we should be doing it and getting on with the job.
And I can see this is going to end in tears.
So I suppose it's inevitable, is it, that this is going to be sort of portrayed as the environment versus the livelihoods of country people?
This is the way the debate gets framed, but we've got to remember what preceded the rain, and that was a very long drought, which exposed the river system to all sorts of stress because water had been over-allocated to irrigators over the course of the 80s and 90s especially. And you couldn't imagine a return to that mindset where irrigators hold sway over the river system. Now, of course, that the flows are back, this is actually the best time to do it. It would have been a lot harder to execute a reform like this during the drought. There's going to be argument over the numbers, and there's going to be argument over compensation packages. But if anyone thinks that we need to return to the previous situation, where the river was basically dry because too much had got taken out of it, I think they're kidding themselves.
Yeah, but I think, Barry, that the reality is the river was basically dry because we were in drought. I think that, none of the water flowing out of the Murray mouth today is there because the water buybacks or cutbacks in irrigation. It's there because we've had rains. Now, climate is a big thing. The weather is cyclical. We've had periods of drought and we've had periods of floods in Australia before. No, not a single new dam, not a single catchment was built during those years of drought to take advantage of the inevitable rain.
But putting dams to one side, though, if the river is stressed in a drought, then the irrigation becomes an issue. And surely the prospect of losing the river must worry irrigators as much as having to sell their entitlements.
Well, I think it must worry them. I don't know if I agree about whether this is a good time or a bad time. I was just watching that footage of the river flowing into the sea and thinking in some ways that's bad because it has created this sense of, oh, well, it was just a drought. Now, let's just think of what's happened here. This authority was essentially established as a result of the Water Act, which was instituted by the previous government. There's essentially bipartisanship on this because it went through the Parliament and everybody agreed with it. What the authorities come out and said is, look, our best scientific advice is that we have to do this as an absolute minimum. We should be doing more, but as a minimum we've got to reduce our outtakes by this much. And I think the interesting thing about the report, once everybody starts to be able to digest it, is that it's not just talking about irrigators. It's talking about all water users, farm dams, for example, and water takeouts like that account for about 20% of the potential cut. I don't know if you've flown over the east coast of Australia in recent years, but the number of small farm dams seems to have just mushroomed, and they're not properly accounted for in water figures. So it's going to become a very contentious political issue, but because it is going to be done on a basin-by-basin approach, the scope to actually have reasonably sensible discussions about how you approach this issue over a sensible time frame should be there. If people don't get
let's hear from Tony Burke before we go on, the minister involved in this, and it's a bit of a reality check when you hear from him.
What's released today by the Murray Darling Basin Authority is not the final word on what needs to be done to deliver a healthy river. If you do not want to sell your water, you don't sell your water. The government, there is a water trading market out there that is much bigger than the purchases that government engages in. And we purchase a fraction of what is available on that market, but we only purchase from people who are wanting to sell.
So if it is voluntary, then this suggestion that people will be marching in the streets, who will they be?
I think that this suggestion of people marching in the streets, that's a long way off. What people are going to encounter as a result of this, Barry, is a rise in the cost of food, and as one of the earlier speakers pointed out, I think Bob Catter, that Australia will become one of the biggest net importers of food if we have to have these drastic cutbacks along the Murray-Darling Basin. And it's just not enough for the Greens to be suggesting that if you live in inner Sydney, you can grow all your tomatoes from one upside-down pot plant. This is not a serious approach to the problem. Yeah. The other thing about this report is that it doesn't really take into account the enormous social upheaval that's going to be caused when those well-established communities up and down the Murray, from Griffith and other areas, which supply a lot of export dollars. You only have to think of the yellowtail wine, for example. These people are going to be belted by this.
Well, I suppose, even though it's voluntary, as those people pull out, that's going to have an impact on the wider community and on shopkeepers.
Absolutely.
Barry, the reality check there from Tony Burke is that they're not going to push it if there's on-the-ground resistance. But the test for this government, as it is the test on a couple of other issues, is whether they've got the capacity to carry a public conversation, for long enough to be able to get consent from voters to move.
And I think that there is this really interesting problem for the government about, last term they got into a lot of trouble for having reviews of everything. And this time round, it's not so much reviews of everything, but a whole series of review processes on minerals tax, on water. And the thing that I noticed out of Tony Burke's comments on Friday was that he's saying, look, this is the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, it's got nothing to do with us, it's independent. Now, all of those things are true, but there's a very interesting line that the government's got to draw saying, yes, this is what they're doing, and what they've said is we have got to find a way of doing this, and we as a government have got to be the leaders in helping you work out how we best do it. They can't be passengers in this conversation, which is a risk for them in this, as it has been in a couple of other issues.
And it's a long, drawn-out time frame, isn't it?
Yeah, but the argument from the irrigators, and having covered this issue for a good decade or more, the first thing I hear from irrigators is can't sell the thing. What they don't like is water to be traded out of their own district. They like to capture the water in their own district. Now, water, if you do put a decent price on it and you allow trade outside the district, tends to move to its highest value use. So a crop like rice doesn't do as well as wine, as grapes. That's the first point. The second point to bear in mind is that the irrigators are going to be better off in this process, because once you take 20 to 30% out of the system for the environment, the price of water goes up. So they're going to be crying crocodile tears about losing communities, which I don't think is on the cards, but they've got to bear in mind a lot of their members are going to be financially much better off. Somebody else is going to have to pick up the tab. Obviously, the tab gets picked up by the general taxpayer.
If they're getting a market price. And I think one of the complaints is that the Commonwealth hasn't been buying at market rates.
No, because it buys in bulk. George, it's in a position to say, to go to one of the bigger irrigators and say, just give us a quarter of your licences, which are pretty much useless 9 years out of 10 anyway. And
George, when the irrigators do sell their waters back, what happens to those people from those communities?
Well, the question for the people in any community is, if you're going to be relying on a single economic source of income, you obviously don't have a viable community. Now, I don't mean you're going to shut these communities down, but I think these communities need to have a good hard think about what else they can do to earn a living.